Welcome to the MED panel on protecting children in armed conflict, organized in the framework of the 7th edition of the Rome MED Dialogues, co-promoted by ISPI and by the Italian Minister of Foreign Affairs, which is going to be held from December 2nd to 4th in Rome. Today's event is organized in partnership with Save the Children, the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack, and the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, European Union and Cooperation. I'm Marta Serafini from Corriere della Sera. I'm very pleased to be the chair of this panel. And let me be very quickly about the focus that we are, the focus of our panel today. It's a particularly important issue, protecting children in armed conflict, especially important today. We have seen recently in the last weeks, we have discussed a lot about the impact of conflict on civilians related to Afghanistan crisis. But here today we are trying to have with our panel to have a focus on Mediterranean area. Also, 2020 marked the 20th anniversary of the United Nations Optional Protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child on the Involvement of Children in Armed Conflict. The protocol strongly condemns the targeting of children in situations of armed conflict and direct attacks on schools. This protocol it has now been ratified by 171 countries all over the world. As practical tool, 112 states have now endorsed the Safe School Declaration, an internal governmental political commitment to protect students, teachers, school, university from the worst effect of armed conflict. However, while significant progress has been registered, children affected by armed conflict continue to experience grave violation and abuses. In 2020, there were, for example, a reported increase by 33 of attacks on educational and military use of educational facilities. The concern is particularly pressing in light of the COVID-19 pandemic that forced the closure of education facilities around the world and its consequences for the Mediterranean region, where conflict and crisis are on the rise in a number of fragile and conflict-affected countries. And this roundtable also tried to provide a critical platform for the Mediterranean region to recommit to safeguarding education during conflict, as well as a space to share experience, good practice, and recommendation to protect children in armed conflict and ensure their safe education. During the event, our speaker will bring renewed attention to the ongoing problem of targeting of children and attacks on school, while also reviewing the progress achieved since the launch of Safe School Declaration and adoption of the optional protocol. This discussion comes at an important time, just few days in advance of the 4th International Conference on the Safe School Declaration to be held in Abuja, Nigeria, from 25 to 27 October. It is the first time the conference will take place in an African state, and it will be an important moment to confirm the international community commitment in support of children living in war-ravaged areas. So let me start with Ms. Marina Sereni, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation in Italy. Mr. Reni, thanks to join us. And my first question is about this, Italy's increasing commitment in the children and environment conflict agenda and participation in conference in Abuja. The importance to focus on the situation in the Mediterranean area and to discuss an important issue as the condition of children affected by conflicts within the framework of the Med dialogue. What we can say about this?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Excellencies, colleagues, friends, let me thank ISPI for having organized this panel, as well as the co-sponsors, Spain, Save the Children, and the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack. It is a pleasure for me to open this event. Sorry, someone entered the room, which for the second year in a row provides the possibility to discuss within the framework of the Med dialogues the dire condition of children living in areas affected by armed conflict in the Mediterranean region. I am convinced that the Med dialogues that will take place at the beginning of December provide a particularly well-suited context to bring renewed attention to the ongoing problems of targeting children and attacks on schools. Over the last years, there have been several important achievements that were already mentioned by our moderator. Among those, let me mention the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, on the involvement of children in armed conflict, ratified now by 171 states, and the Safe Schools Declaration that has been endorsed by 112 states. Italy is committed to promote the universal endorsement of these fundamental documents, which are cornerstones to guarantee that children are not recruited by armed forces, nor otherwise involved in armed conflict, and that educational facilities are not targeted. In a few days, I will intervene in the fourth edition of the Safe Schools Conference, the main international gathering to raise awareness and share best practices on the need to protect schools and access to education, also during armed conflicts. This will represent a key moment in the global effort to implement the declaration. It is of particular importance that this conference will be held for the first time in Africa, namely in Nigeria. This year's report of the UN Secretary General on the protection of civilians in armed conflict is a stark reminder of the huge impact of COVID-19 and the related restrictive measures on access to education, healthcare, and social services for children affected by armed conflict. School closures continue to have a detrimental effect on millions of children worldwide. According to UN data, in 2020, there were more than 500 attacks to educational facilities, and an increase by more than 30% from the previous year. Schools were bombed, looted, and used for military purposes, and consequently were temporarily or permanently closed. Let me highlight in particular the specific attention that we should devote to girls in conflict contexts. Today is the International Day of Girls, and we all know how important is education in order to empower girls and girls' children all over the world. This panel represents a further step in a process that must be seen in a Mediterranean perspective, aimed at enhancing the protection of children in armed conflict in the wider MENA region and beyond. Italy will continue to do its part, engaging at bilateral and multilateral levels on all initiatives aimed at advancing this agenda as the International Day to Protect Education from Attack, promoted by Qatar in 2020. We will also continue devoting huge attention to safeguard access to education in the MENA region within our development projects initiatives and our humanitarian intervention. Among those, let me mention the programs financed by the Italian Development Cooperation in response to the Syrian crisis, in support of school feeding implemented by the World Food Programme, as well as the initiative carried out by UNESCO in Iraq to promote inclusive and quality education for children without access to the education system. We are convinced that an inclusive dialogue and the sharing of best practices among Mediterranean countries could foster tangible results and contribute to build a better future for children. Thank you.
Thank you to Marina Sereni. And after that, we will see a video registration made by Ms. Pilar Cancela Rodriguez. She's Secretary of State for International Cooperation by Spain.
Apreciadas señoras y señores, como representante del Ministerio de Asuntos Exteriores, Unión Europea y Cooperación de España, es para mí un honor darles la bienvenida a este evento. Desde una perspectiva regional, analizaremos la protección de los niños y las niñas en los conflictos armados y la declaración de escuelas seguras. Agradezco sinceramente al Ministerio de Exteriores de Italia, a la Coalición Mundial para proteger la educación de ataques y a Save the Children su compromiso para hacer posible esta iniciativa. Los ataques contra la educación y el uso militar de las escuelas y universidades son, lamentablemente, una consecuencia devastadora de los conflictos armados y la violencia política. Provoca graves daños a niñas y niños y a su profesorado al reducir tanto el acceso a la educación como la calidad de la misma. Según el último informe publicado por la coalición, entre 2015 y 2019 se produjeron en todo el mundo más de 11.000 ataques contra instalaciones educativas, estudiantes y personal docente. El resultado, más de 22.000 personas heridas o asesinadas. La Declaración sobre Escuelas Seguras constituye un compromiso político insoslayable para garantizar el derecho a la educación durante los conflictos armados. Desde su aprobación en 2015, somos ya 112 Estados los que hemos asumido el compromiso de proteger a estudiantes y docentes. Con ello, aspiramos a evitar que las escuelas y universidades se conviertan en objetivos militares, contribuyendo así a preservar el carácter civil de estas instalaciones. El rotundo compromiso de España con esta agenda se inscribe en una consolidada trayectoria de diplomacia humanitaria y de promoción del respeto del derecho internacional humanitario, situándola en una posición prioritaria de nuestra acción exterior. Tras las conferencias internacionales celebradas en Oslo y Buenos Aires, España acogió la tercera Conferencia Internacional sobre Escuelas Seguras, celebrada en Palma de Mallorca en mayo de 2019. Esta conferencia supuso un paso decisivo, poniendo de relieve los significativos avances que las administraciones públicas y la sociedad civil hemos logrado para garantizar que las escuelas sean un lugar seguro y ofrezcan protección al conjunto de la comunidad educativa. El Gobierno de España, de la mano de la coalición, como aliada imprescindible, a través de la Agencia Española de Cooperación Internacional para el Desarrollo, organizó a principios de año el primer programa internacional de formación técnica en la materia. Durante 4 semanas, más de 90 representantes de diferentes ministerios de los 20 estados invitados, junto a una apreciada representación de la sociedad civil, compartimos un espacio de trabajo virtual orientado al análisis conjunto y a la identificación de buenas prácticas y experiencias. La cuarta conferencia internacional, organizada por el Gobierno de Nigeria, es una buena oportunidad para reflexionar conjuntamente y avanzar en la protección del derecho a la educación, especialmente en aquellos contextos más frágiles y con mayor riesgo para las escuelas, consolidar esos avances, incrementar compromisos y afianzar alianzas. Oriente Medio y el norte de África es una de las regiones en las que se han registrado un mayor aumento de estos ataques. En concreto, Siria, Irak, Yemen, Libia, Palestina o Turquía se han visto especialmente afectados por el incremento de la violencia contra las escuelas. Estos países deben saber que cuentan con aliados en este camino, entre los que indudablemente se encuentra España. Debemos ser conscientes de que los compromisos asumidos con la adhesión a la declaración deben traducirse en medidas concretas con especial atención a mujeres y niñas. Resulta imprescindible identificar los desafíos para la región, compartir experiencias y buenas prácticas y en base a ello y todos juntos buscar y encontrar soluciones tangibles. Es nuestra obligación aprovechar el impulso político y el consenso en torno a esta agenda, concretar líneas de trabajo efectivo que permitan salvar vidas y proteger el derecho universal a la educación. Les deseo un trabajo fructífero y les animo a continuar el debate durante la 4ª Conferencia Internacional sobre Escuelas Seguras en Nigeria. Muchísimas gracias.
Eccoci di nuovo, sorry, we are again. And now I am very happy to give the words to Daniela Fattarella, CEO of Save the Children. And to Ms. Fattarella, I am asking the situation of children living in conflict-affected countries and the impact of the pandemic. What we can say about these 2 points and what role can have the MENA region?
Thank you very much. It is really a pleasure to be here today. And I would like to start thanking the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Italy, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Spain, the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack, and ISPI in supporting the organization of this event. I do believe that this roundtable represents a real critical discussion to shed light on the situation of children affected by armed conflict. These children do continue to experience grave violations and abuses in Middle East in particular. And despite the significant progress achieved, much more remains to be done to implement existing commitments, especially to ensure child protection and safe education. As it has been said, this roundtable is also very timely as we are approaching the Abuja meeting, which is really critical for the issue that we will be discussing today. I want to start by saying that unfortunately in 2020, the number of children who lived in conflict increased and reached the highest ever record. For the very first time, it is estimated that a staggering 452 million children will live less than 50 kilometers to conflict, with a huge proportion of these children who live close to where armed groups or forces recruited and used children in conflict. And the number of states where children are recruited is at its highest point in the past 30 years. It means that we have the highest number of children in conflict, the highest number of children living close to where armed groups recruit children, and the highest number of states where children are recruited. So the picture is not good at all. And Middle East, unfortunately, deserves a special place in this framework with 2 alarming data. The very first one is that 1 out of 3 children in Middle East lived in conflict zone in 2020. And in 2020, children in the Middle East had the highest probability of spending their childhood in a conflict zone than any other child in the world. Top of that, a large proportion of children who are in these conflict zones are at risk of recruitment. And while we'll assist in an increase of children living in conflict, also we witness a rise in the total number of attacks against schools and hospitals. If we take the case of Syria, research suggests that the number of attacks reported has increased compared to previous conflicts, including Bosnia. And this means that such attacks have become like a commonplace in armed conflicts. And this is outrageous. But this is outrageous also and especially because school is perceived as a second home by most students, especially the ones who are living in tough places and are looking for a safe place to stay. So schools are supposed to be the place where children feel protected, where they can learn, and where they can dream about their future. So when we are thinking about attacks on schools, this reduces both enrollment and attendance, and then create psychological barriers for children and caregivers to return to school. Children who live through attack on schools suffer psychological trauma, and they need assistance to return to their normal life. But if we think about access to safe, good quality learning opportunities, this plays an important role in mitigating the harmful impact of conflict on children, because this reduces the risk of violation, such as sexual violence and recruitment into armed forces or armed groups. As it has been mentioned, the Safe School Declaration, launched in 2015, has gained momentum in the imperative of not using schools for military purposes. But again, the Middle East is one of the regions with the smaller number of states that endorse it. As Save the Children, we want to make our part. We are a member of the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack, and especially we are particularly proud of our Safe Schools programs, which have helped to keep children safe from all hazard in and around school. And we support governments to put their commitment into practices in many different places in the world. But as I said, through these numbers and through this framework and the picture of children in conflict today is not enough what we are doing. So we believe that states should take concrete action, at least in 4 areas. The very first thing is that states need to uphold international norms and standards, which means commit to it and implement in full, both the optional protocol to the Convention of the Rights of the Child and also the endorsement of the Paris Principles and the Paris Commitments. Second thing that all states need to do is to commit to endorse and fully implement the Safe Schools Declaration and to encourage other states to do that. As we said, the MENA region have the highest number of attacks and the less endorsement between states. So the Abuja conference is really a great opportunity that cannot be missed. The third thing is that states need to hold perpetrators of violence against children to account. This is particularly critical, which means supporting international mechanisms to prosecute cases of violence of children's rights in conflict, including through resourcing dedicated gender-sensitive and child-specific experts in international investigation. And then, of course, states need to enable children to recover from conflict and need to take practical action to protect them from harm, which means also using school as a safe space. So school can be the place that can provide children and young people with a refuge from repeated stressors. There is really still too much to do, and we must protect children in conflict, and we must guarantee their education. Honestly, we cannot accept any more lost generation. This is why this meeting is so critical, and I wish everybody a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you to Ms. Fattarella. And after that, we started the second session of our panel. And let me introduce Ambassador Ali Ahmed Saif Al-Thani, Ambassador of Qatar to the United Nations in New York. Your Excellency, what were the key steps taken to promote the International Day to protect education from attack?
Thank you so much. And of course, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me, at the outset, I would like to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Italy and the Italian Institute for International Political Studies for organizing this very timely dialogue on safeguarding education during conflict. To address your question, let me start by saying that protecting education during conflict and crisis and ensuring all children have access to quality education is an issue of great importance to the state of Qatar. Over a year ago, on 28th of May 2020, the United Nations General Assembly unanimously adopted Resolution 74/275, presented by the state of Qatar, that designated September 9th as the International Day to protect education from attack. This day, of course, is due to the efforts of Her Highness Sheikha Moza bint Nasser, chairperson of the Qatari-based organization Education Above All Foundation, and Her Highness as well as the UN's Sustainable Development Goal advocate. Her Highness successfully advocated for the adoption by the UN of a resolution proclaiming such a day. This resolution adopting the International Day came into existence exactly 10 years after the General Assembly adopted a landmark resolution, Resolution 64/290, on the right to education in emergencies, calling on member states to ensure the right to education for affected populations in all phases of emergency situations, which was as well presented by the state of Qatar then. Despite this resolution in 2010, attacks on education continued and there was no accountability for perpetrators. This is why an international day calling for the protection of education from attack is extremely important. It serves as a reminder of safeguarding schools as safe spaces for children and the need to prioritize all children's access to education, especially those in vulnerable situations. Let me reiterate that this is not just another day on the UN calendar. It is a day and a call for world leaders to place the protection of education at the top of the global agenda. It calls on all of us to make sure that protection of education is reflected and embodied by action on the ground through effective mechanisms that will end impunity for the perpetrators of such attacks. Let me conclude briefly that the International Day could not come at a more critical time, as the COVID-19 pandemic has placed the fragile progress made across education under attack. And I will stop here.
Thanks a lot, Excellency. To Diane Yujan, I hope my pronunciation is correct. She's Executive Director of Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack. I would love to ask if she can share with us how countries have moved from commitment to practice in implementation of the declaration, and what have been the recent success. The audio.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today and to all the work that has been done by all of you to protect education during armed conflict. Before I start talking about good practice, I'd like to just give a quick overview of the region from some of the data that we have. And as has been repeated by many people, attacks on education globally has actually increased by a third in 2020 from 2019, even as schools have been closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I will say, however, that in the Middle East, there have been a few conflict-affected countries where there has been a decline in attacks in 2020 compared to 2019 and prior years, while in other places in the region, attacks have persisted at the same level. In Libya, for example, since October 2020, when the UN brokered a ceasefire, there's been a decline. Also in Iraq and Syria, where conflict has waned in recent years with Islamic State-related conflict, fatalities dropping to a low point in both countries in 2020. And in Palestine as well, in 2020, schools were closed due to COVID-19, and so the numbers have dropped there. However, taken as a whole, as many have already said, the region has experienced very high levels of military use of schools and universities in 2020, as well as high number of attacks on education involving explosive weapons, specifically airstrikes, shelling, and IEDs. And female students and girls' education were also targeted in Libya and Yemen last year specifically. But globally, there have been tangible improvements in law and practice protecting education in both countries in peace and in conflict since the declaration was open for endorsement in 2015. Globally, over a dozen countries have revised their laws or military guidance to reflect their commitments. For example, the United Kingdom has a dedicated policy on human security, integrating the Safe Schools Declaration and guidelines to protecting schools and universities from military use during armed conflict into military planning and operations. Denmark, New Zealand, Ecuador, and Switzerland, amongst others, have also updated their military manuals. Last year, the Central African Republic criminalized attacks on schools and occupation of schools in its child protection code. Mali has established a national action plan, which includes capacity building with community mobilization, and a draft bill on the protection of education from attack is due to be adopted later this year. In August in Ukraine, they launched an action plan for implementing the declaration, which amongst other things creates a monitoring mechanism for attacks on educational institutions and aims to ensure a systematic approach to protecting education in armed conflict. In September this year, Nigeria released its national policy for safety, security, and violence-free schools, drawing on the declaration. At the African Union level, principles of the declaration are included in the African Union Doctrine on Peace Support Operations, adopted in January 2021 this year, which commits to ensuring that schools are not attacked and used for military purposes. This is an important milestone which reflects the growing consensus within the African continent on the importance of protecting schools from attack and military use. At the global level, the UN Security Council, for the first time, issued an outcome document focused on protecting education from attack in a presidential statement in September 2020. As we're approaching the UN Security Council debate on women, peace, and security, it's important to note that Italy's National Action Plan to implement the resolution recognizes the significant role the Safe Schools Declaration can play in ensuring safe education for women and girls. The Safe Schools Declaration is having an impact, saving lives and enabling students to receive the education they need to build their communities and societies and meet their own potential as individuals. The more good examples of implementing the Declaration commitments that are collected and shared, inspiring others to replicate them and adapt them, the faster the transformative power of the Safe Schools Declaration can be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you to Mr. Niyujan. And let me introduce Mr. Sahar Arbi, Senior Political Advisor of Ministry of Education in Iraq. And Ms. Sahar will share with us a statement.
Hi. A good greetings to the sponsors, to the all sponsors of this meeting, and to the all present ladies and gentlemen. Let me give a brief summary of what the Ministry of Education in Iraq has done to make the educational conditions better in all respects. First, the Ministry of Education working within its responsibility to ensuring that teaching and examination work best in all schools and working on overcome the challenges facing these goals. Two, the Ministry of Education in cooperation with the Ministry of Defense directed its efforts to evacuate school buildings from the security force after providing alternative place. The security procedures got out from 4 schools, and the exit procedures of other 2 schools will be complete. Third, the Ministry of Education with UNICEF implemented within the framework of the joint cooperation plan for the years 2016 and 2017, the life skills and positive education program, which aim to rejecting violence among students, give them equality without any differences, and building citizenships. Fourth, the Ministry of Education is working with UNICEF on joint cooperation plan, which aimed at benefiting children, adolescents, and children who affected by conflicts to access equitable quality education, rehabilitation of schools. Fifth, the national strategy for education in Iraq was developed with UNESCO Sixth, the ministry, working with our partners in the European Union and some international civil society institutions in several areas, including programs to return the student to school in Baghdad and in provinces such as Diyala, Kirkuk, Salahuddin, Anbar, and Nainawa. And there is the project empowering the community to support children's education, which aim to make the population the population active citizens, working on enhanced school enrollment children and improve the school environment. The Ministry of Education working on completing an action plan that includes the implementation of what was recommended in the implementation of Safe Schools workshop, which was held in 2021. In the end, I thank all the organizers of this meeting, and I wish everyone success in achieving better education for all children and youth in the world. Thank you.
Thanks to Miss Sara. And let me introduce now Laura Guercio, representative from the University Network for Promoting the Rights and the Protection of Children Involved in Armed Conflict. To Ms. Guercio, I would love to ask what impact does the United Nations control system have on the right to the children education?
Thank you, Mrs. Serafini, for your question. And before replying, allow me to thank the organizer for inviting me to participate in this debate on such an important topic. There is, in my opinion, a starting point to emphasize in order to fully understand the difficulties of affirming children's right to education, particularly in wartime scenario. For a long time, the right to education, like all other economic, social, and cultural rights, has had to deal with the long debated question of its justiciability. As a result, there has long been a lack of common understanding of this right, both in terms of content and the nature of states' obligations. At international level, this approach to the right to education has gradually given way thanks to the contribution of United Nations treaty bodies like the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights and the Committee on the Rights of the Child. Their concluding observation on the periodic reports of the states under review are an important filter for better understanding the main issues in implementing the right to a primary education that shall be compulsory and to a secondary and higher education that state parties are called to make effective, including through the principle of free schooling as stated in Article 13 and 14 of the Covenant on Economic and Social Rights, as well in Article 28 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. This obligation also applied during armed conflict because, as recently confirmed also by the International Court of Justice, human rights laws are not suspended in a situation of armed conflict, but they must be harmonized with humanitarian rights law. As a result, the United Nations treaty bodies' concluding observation can be used as ideal criteria for analyzing the level of implementation of the right to education in armed conflict countries. Without going country by country here, also due to the time constraints, but summarizing all of the concern expressed by United Nations treaty bodies over the years, a framework of critical challenges emerges, which includes the decrease in school enrollment, particularly among girls, the frequent military occupation of school, attacks on school, incidents of harassment directed at students and teachers, which particularly prevents female students from attending school, the number of children and school personnel killed and injured as a result of attacks on school, the poor quality of education and the limited availability of school, as well as their poor physical condition. Two very brief reflections on this aspect. The first, it's worth noting that in their most recent concluding observation, the United Nations treaty bodies recognize the importance of the Safe School Declaration by recommending that states endorse it and take concrete steps to prevent military use of schools. This has been recalled, for example, by the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights in its 2019 concluding observation on Israel, by thus demonstrating the interconnection between the human rights system and the instrument working in the humanitarian rights framework. Second, analyzing their most recent work session, the competent United Nations treaty bodies expressed their appreciation for the periodic reports submitted by Mediterranean countries affected by armed conflict, while also keeping in mind the restriction imposed by the war, as highlighted, for example, by the CRC in its 2019 concluding observation on the periodic report of the Syrian Arab Republic. On the other hand, the persistence of the same problematic aspect concerning the right to education in armed conflict countries reflects a lack of concrete commitments by states. This means that states must agree not only to be reviewed by the United Nations treaty bodies, but also to effectively collaborate with United Nations treaty bodies following the review. And that's, I think, one of the main challenges that we have to face.
Thank you very much to Ms. Guercio, and I will be back to Her Excellency Ambassador Altani. And my second question to Ambassador Altani is how Qatar is working to assure the protection of children from armed conflict in the region.
Many thank you, Ms. Marta. And let me address this question by saying that the Qatari-based organization, Education Above All Foundation, through its Protect Education in Insecurity and Conflict program named as PAC, has led on the topic of protection for more than a decade now. The founder, Her Highness Sheikh Moza bint Nasser, has called for action at many high-level meetings as well as at the UN Security Council. The state of Qatar has called for more accountability for the preventable man-made causes of interference with the right to education, such as attacks on education. Education Above All was an originator and founding member of the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack, founded in 2011, with core members that include, of course, PAC, as well as UNICEF, UNHCR, UNESCO, Save the Children, and Human Rights Watch. The state of Qatar is a core member of the coalition that led to the Safe School declarations as well. Qatar has consistently called attention to the problem of enforcement of resolutions, and that the fact that perpetrators of attacks on education were getting away without the slightest penalty. Of course, much more must be done. Among some of the deterrent measures is strengthening of documentation of attacks on education, including the collection of data disaggregated by gender. Attacks on schools and or on hospitals are one of the 6 grave violations subject to UN's monitoring and reporting mechanism, the MRM, pursuant to Security Council Resolution 1612 of 2005 and Security Council Resolution 1998 of 2011, which requests the Secretary General to include in his annual list of shame those parties to conflict that commit attacks on schools. Qatar has long understood that the vital role that reliable data play in monitoring and responding to attacks on education across the globe. Education Above All Foundation is at the forefront of efforts to improve access to data on education in emergencies. This data helps to highlight and understand how attacks against education during times of conflict and insecurity deprive children of the right to education. Education Above All Foundation is also supporting the development of humanitarian technology to record data on attacks on schools, teachers and students, and education-related violations of law in order to help perpetrators of attacks to account. to hold perpetrators of attacks to account. This global data service on attacks on education is a hub for the collection, sorting, analysis, storage, and distribution of information about attacks on education for policymakers, the UN, NGOs, and other stakeholders. These efforts depict the state of Qatar's belief that by working together, we can ensure that children everywhere can grow up safe, healthy, and educated so they can help to build a secure and sustainable future for themselves, their families, and their societies. And I thank you again for organizing this timely event and on making sure we keep the focus on protecting education from attack.
Okay, thanks a lot, Her Excellency. And to Ms. Neujan, I would love to ask what can states expect at the 4th International Conference on the Safe School Declaration?
Thank you so much. The 4th International Conference on the Safe Schools Declaration, which will be held in Abuja, Nigeria, as well as virtually on October 25th to 27th, will be a critical moment for mobilizing action and putting the Safe Schools Declaration commitments into practice. And in fact, that's the theme of the conference. Its aim really is to build on the conferences that have come before it, in Spain in 2019, in Argentina in 2017, in Norway in 2015 when the declaration was launched. And will be hosted by Nigeria, Norway, Argentina, Spain, the African Union Commission, and the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack. Its purpose is to provide the opportunity for all states to gather, to examine progress in implementing the declaration, and build on this momentum to galvanize further endorsement and accelerate implementation. 6 years have passed since the declaration was open for endorsement, so we really do now have a body of good practice in implementing the declaration. And the conference will showcase this good practice so that other states can be inspired to adapt these same measures in their own context. At the same time, the conference will also discuss challenges with the aim of identifying solutions. As has been said by others, the conference is the first one that's going to be held in the African continent, in a country that's been significantly impacted by attacks on education. But it's also a continent and a country where there have been important innovations in protecting education, so there's a lot to learn from them. By endorsing the declaration, states are joining a community of practice, and at the Abuja conference, Norway will launch a state-led implementation network for endorsing states to share successful models and strategies, putting the declaration commitments into practice, while also considering challenges and how to overcome them. And there's also already been consultations in the Sahel region with states, endorsing states, to talk about how to really use this network to meet their needs, and also consultation with Central Asia and Europe on these issues. And as was mentioned earlier, as part of this network, the Spanish government, with support from the coalition, convened a virtual training course to exchange good practice in implementing the commitments. And this training brought together over 90 representatives from 20 countries. Following the Abuja conference, there will be similar trainings and capacity initiatives that will be rolled out as part of this network as well. So the outcome of the conference, we hope, will be that states are both motivated and equipped with tools and knowledge to strengthen implementation nationally, and that at the global level, international organizations and civil society are further committed to supporting them, bringing us closer to a world in which students and educators can all study in safety, no matter where they live. So I'll just encourage everyone. The beauty of, perhaps the only beauty of the situation we're living in this world now, is that we can have these virtual conferences where literally anyone who has access to the internet can participate. So I encourage everyone, but obviously particularly states, to register. The URL is ssdconference.education.gov.ng. ssdconference.education.gov.ng. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Miss Niujan. And to Ms. Guercio, my last question is, how does the work of the United Nations Committee on Economical, Social and Cultural Rights interact with the regional human rights control and protection bodies?
Yes, I will talk about actually all United Nations treaty bodies, not only on the Committee on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights. Before I mention the important role covered by the United Nations treaty bodies at international level, however, at regional level, other bodies and institutions are competent on these issues, like the African Commission on Human and People Rights, the Inter-American Commission and its Courts of Human Rights, and as far concern European level, the European Court of Human Rights. On the other hand, the work of the United Nations treaty bodies has definitely had impacted on the work of these regional bodies. Let me recall a few examples as far concern the Mediterranean countries. The African Commission is empowered to draw inspiration from international law on human and people rights, particularly from United Nations instruments such as the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights when interpreting the African Charter, which has been ratified by most African countries bordering the Mediterranean region. Then, for instance, in its 2016 resolution on the right to education in Africa, the African Commission paid special attention to Article 13 of the International Covenant on Economic and Social Rights as interpreted by the competent United Nations treaty body through its general observation, and urged African states to guarantee the full scope of the right to education for all in Africa, independently if in peace or wartime. This is just one example of the dialogue between international and regional bodies that we can also see in the judgment, for example, of the European Court of Human Rights on the right to education. The court often recalled not only the Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, but also the Convention on the Right of the Child, and also the general observation of the competent treaty bodies as a normative principle to which to refer. Anyway, it's crucial that treaty bodies' work be translated into concrete measures at the national level. In the context of the right to education and the Committee on the Rights on the Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, many times recall its general comment 3, paragraph 10 on the nature of the obligation of state parties by requiring as a minimum obligation in relation to the right to education the adoption and implementation of a national educational program for all on a non-discriminatory basis. This is a comment which works also in armed conflict situation, as I said before. But how can this obligation be effectively implemented? They are recalled before also the national action plans, and for example, the Italian NEP on women, peace and security focus on the importance of education. But allow me to say that also beside the international and national bodies, allow me to recall the important role that national human rights institutions, in accordance with the Paris Principle, can play in making the right to education as other rights effective at the national level. For this reason, it's crucial to encourage states to establish national human rights institutions as independent and relevant actors working also in conflict and post-conflict situations, as underlined by the International Kyiv Declaration of 2015. But again, I think that it is another challenge that international world has to face.
Thank you very much also to Ms. Guercio, and thanks to everybody. And I'm very happy also to have been your chairwoman. I don't know if it's because generally it's chairman, but it's because also this panel is made all by women. So it's something that it's particularly interesting and important for us, I think. So I don't know if there are some intervention or question from the public. I don't know. Give me a sign, please, from the organization if there is something. No, we don't have any intervention. So I would love to close. Obviously, thanks to all our speakers and for this important topic. And I would love to close with a message by Sara, that it's a 10-year-old girl from Idlib, from Syria, and it's a message collected by Save the Children. Thanks to everybody.
أنا نازحة من معرة النعمان على إدلب. صار لي سنتين نازحة، أنا وأمي وأبوي وأخواتي وأخواتي أختي الكبيرة، وأنا عمري 10 سنين من الصف الرابع. كانت مدرستي قصفت وأنا فيها. زعلت كتير على رفقاتي وعلى أنستي وعلى المديرة. زعلت حتى على المدرسة لأنه أنا كنت يعني حسيت إنه ما بقى في مدارس، لأنه هاي مدرستي كنت متعلقة فيها، وقلت خلص ما بقى نتعلم. بس هلا الحمد لله تأقلمنا مع الوضع، وإن شاء الله بنرجع كل واحد على بلده. لا الحمد لله ما حدا تأذى. في طلاب تأذوا بس مو ما كم سبب، وقعت شباك وقعت باب. بس سمعت سمعت انه في خطف، وسمعت في حدا انه استهدفت مدرسته وهو عم يدرس فيها، وزعلت كتير عليهم يعني حسيتهم كأنهم اخواتي. زعلت كتير عليهم. طيب. بروح بتخبى بأأمن مكان، وبفتح تمي بسكر داناتي مشان ما اسمع الطيران وحس انه ما في شيء. مثلا امي واختي وابوي كتير بحكي لهم وقت اللي مثلا بضيع علي الشغلات، بروح بحكي لهم، فضفض لهم كل قلبي. طيب. انه اعطي كل واحد فقير مصاري، وعالج كل واحد مريض، والمدرسة تصير آمنة لكل طالب عم يدرس. انه صير دكتورة بالمستقبل وعالج الفقيرين، وانه يرجع كل واحد على بلده، وانه تصير كل مدارس آمنة وكل بيوت آمنة وكل المكان آمن. قديم شوي. بس الحمد لله منيح، يعني منيح لقيناه. يعني في عالم هلا ساكنين بالشارع وبالخيام، الحمد لله انه لقيناه مشان ما نقعد لا بشارع ولا بخيمة. لانه المدرسة مهمة، انه هي بيتي الثاني، وما بقدر اني اطلع اي شيء بالمستقبل الا اذا درست. تمام. يكون ما في قصف، ويكون يكون بس ما في قصف، وبتكون المدرسة آمنة.